Title: The Twilight Zone. Chapter 1. The mission. The first rays of sunlight gleamed across the barren landscape of Mercury, stretching across the surface with a brilliance only the closest star could provide. The Mercury rover station, a high-tech mobile habitat, stood at the edge of the Twilight Zone, the narrow strip of livable land that stretched between the blistering heat of day and the freezing cold of night. Captain Riley Voss stood at the helm, staring at the massive sun, looming like a small orange in the sky. It was almost mesmerizing, but Riley knew it was deadly. The sun's rays could bake you in an instant. They had a month, just 29 days, before they had to move again, just a few miles forward, to stay within this narrow safe zone. "We've been here for 2 weeks already," Riley said to the crew, the tension evident in their tired faces. "We've got another 14 days before the sun swallows us whole. Make sure everything's working." Her team was the first to try and live here. Scientists, engineers, and survivalists. They'd come to study Mercury, hoping to unlock its secrets. But now, survival was just as much a part of the mission as the science. Chapter 2. The narrow window inside the rover station. The atmosphere was controlled, but only just. The temperature kept fluctuating dangerously close to the extremes outside. The station's cooling systems hummed constantly. Every minor glitch in the equipment could mean disaster. Dr. Elena Reyes, the geologist, was busy mapping the surrounding terrain, her eyes glued to a data screen. "There's a unique formation up ahead, something we haven't seen before. I think it's worth checking out," she said, pointing to a jagged, dark outcrop of rock several kilometers away. But Riley shook her head. "We can't afford to get distracted. We need to stay within the Twilight Zone. If we get too close to the edge, we're done. We move, we keep moving. That's the only rule." There was an uneasy silence, then Jackson Wilder, the chief engineer, spoke up. "We've got about 10% left on the cooling system. We'll need to repair it soon." He glanced over at Riley. "And the rover wheels, they've started wearing down faster than we expected. If we lose our mobility before the next move, we could be stuck here in the heat." "Fix it," Riley ordered. She turned to the rest of the team. "Keep an eye on the sun, stay sharp. We've got less than a month before we make our move again." Chapter 3. The flare. The team worked tirelessly, fixing the rover's systems, checking every dial and button. As the days passed, the Mercury rover station kept inching forward, but the sun grew larger and larger on the horizon. It was as if it was drawing closer to them, burning with an intensity that felt unnatural, even for the sun. The tension was palpable. Everyone had a role, and they couldn't afford mistakes. Then, on the 20th day, disaster struck. A solar flare, much stronger than anything they had anticipated, erupted from the sun. It sent a shockwave of radiation toward them, scrambling the rover's communications systems. The temperature inside the station began to rise, and Riley knew they had hours, maybe less, to fix everything before the sun's wrath turned them into ash. "Jackson! What the hell happened?" Riley shouted, her voice tight with panic. I don't know, Captain. We're getting interference everywhere. The radiation shields aren't holding up as well as we thought," Jackson replied, fingers flying over the control panels. "Shut it down," Riley ordered. "I need everything back to full capacity in 2 hours. If we can't protect the rover, we'll lose everything." The sun blazed brighter in the sky, casting long shadows and threatening to overtake them. The once gentle warmth of the Twilight Zone had become an unbearable heat, and outside, the surface of Mercury was starting to melt. The edge of the safe zone was closing in, and the team was running out of time. Chapter 4. The countdown. The next 12 hours were a blur of repairs, frantic calculations, and testing systems. Everyone was exhausted, but they couldn't afford to stop. The sun was relentless. Every second it crept closer to the horizon, and every second mattered. 5 hours left, Jackson called from his station. The cooling system is at 80% efficiency, but the rover's mobility is still a concern. We can move, but we'll need to be careful. Riley nodded grimly. We move. Now. The rover started to roll, its large wheels crunching across the harsh, rocky surface of Mercury. Behind them, the horizon flared, a burning orange ball, casting an eerie light over the landscape. The Twilight Zone was narrowing, but they couldn't stop now. They had to move, even if it meant risking it all. Chapter 5. The final move. As the team pushed forward, Riley kept her eyes on the horizon, watching the sun chase them. The narrow strip of safe ground seemed smaller than ever, and the minutes felt like hours. We're almost there, Elena said, voice tense. Once we cross into the new zone, we should be safe for another 29 days. But we don't have much time left, Riley finished. The rover was moving steadily, but the weight of the sun's glare on the horizon was almost unbearable. In the distance, the new temperate zone stretched out ahead of them, wide enough to move, narrow enough to be dangerous. They reached the edge just as the sun's rays hit the top of the rover. The cooling system kicked into high gear, keeping them from melting. But the air was still thick with tension. Riley let out a breath. We did it. For now. Epilogue. The price of survival days turned into weeks, and the crew of the Mercury rover station moved, ever forward, through the endless Twilight Zone, living in the shadow of the sun. Their existence was fragile, but they were alive. They were the first. The first to face the brutal reality of Mercury, where survival meant understanding the land, the sun, and what it took to live on a planet that was nothing but extremes. And for every day they survived, they proved that human willpower was more powerful than the scorching heat and blistering radiation of the sun. They would keep moving. They would keep living. As long as they stayed ahead of the sun, they would never give up. End.